Thank you very much, Terry. Welcome everybody to our webinar, Managing Risk in a Data-Driven World. Just as a little bit of introduction, we are finding in the current litigation environment and the current regulatory environment that people are being asked to find information both within their organization and outside of their organization in relation to a number of queries or issues around what did people know, when did they know, how did they find out about certain incidents or maybe certain scenarios that may have happened within the organization. And that's one of the reasons why we're working with Martin and his organization, because they are often the people that are being requested to assist in those investigations, and they use us to actually provide them with the technology to be able to streamline and improve that process. So before we move into the detail of that, I'd like to give you just a very quick background on Utopia, which to give you some idea where we've worked in this sort of space and what we do. So our company is 10 years old. We focus on data and nothing but data. You can see on the map the areas where we operate, and we actually have developed an overall framework called Enterprise Data Lifecycle Management to help organizations manage their data. Over 500 employees worldwide, and focused very, very specifically on ensuring that the information that people have in their organization and information about things regarding their organization are managed most effectively. We've also won a couple of awards, but yeah, they're around innovative solutions in this space as well.
Well, thanks, Peter. This is Martin Tully, and I'm pleased to be part of today's webinar. Obviously, the screen describes a little bit about Katmich and Rosamond. The only thing I want to highlight is we have needs within our organization and the clients that we serve to leverage technology in a variety of different ways, whether it's our white-collar law group that is conducting external or internal investigations of either clients or third parties, or it's dealing with discovery responses to either governmental inquiries, subpoenas, or in the context of ordinary litigation. So being able to leverage technology to more efficiently get to what you need to in the context of exploding data sets is really important. So I'm glad that we're focusing on that topic and some of the best practices and tools today.
Okay, as by way of introduction to this, what is big data is a question that a lot of people are asking. It's still, I think, in the buzzword stage, for want of a better word, where a lot of people are talking about it, but it's really, really difficult at times to put a handle on what it actually means. So when we're looking at what we're talking about today, for us, big data is a framework that deals with and links together structured and unstructured data so that you get the opportunity to link information that's coming from very disparate sources within the construct of, can I find information about things and find relationships about things that I maybe didn't know existed previously. As you've probably heard about the 3 V's for big data: volume, velocity, and variety. You've also got the complexity area. And that's one of the things where the automation actually allows you to deal with in a much more structured way. Because the aim of this is to actually take all of the unstructured data that you've got running around and actually putting it into a structured format where you can make some sense of it. And as you can see, the amount of data that's being created is just growing at unprecedented rates. So over 1,128%. In the last 12 months. And one of the interesting little tidbits of news is that 90% of the world's data produced was done in the last 2 years. So that the rate at which this data is growing is just going to continue to get out of this world, basically.
Well, Peter, I'd like to pick up on the last point you had on the prior slide, which basically referred to big data as part of extreme information governance or information management, and that could not be a truer statement, because the bigger the data, the bigger the information management challenge. And of course, information management, which sounds like a very exciting term, is really about information governance, and the key there is governance. You've got to be able to control and leverage your information and your electronically stored records, which all organizations, I don't care who you are, as Peter pointed out, are simply accumulating more and generating more and more of them every single day at exponential rates, and no sign of slowing down. So why is information governance important? We're going to touch upon a few reasons today, and one has to do with managing risk. The other has to do with leveraging information is leveraging knowledge. Knowledge equals power. We all know that, especially within our organizations and in a very competitive environment. So let me touch real briefly on some of the reasons as to why information governance matters. Some of the obvious ones are legal compliance. Depending on what industry you're in, you may have various rules and regulations that you need to follow in terms of what data you keep, how you keep it, what form you keep it, when you have to provide it, how quickly, and in what form to the requesting regulatory agency. That's very clear. Whether it's a healthcare or financial services, there's a lot of rules and regulations governing the way in which information must be kept. But then there's also, for those that aren't in highly regulated industries, if you're in the context of having to respond to a request for information outside of your, within your organization, and that can come in the form of either a request in litigation, a subpoena, so you're not in litigation, but you are being subpoenaed by the parties in litigation to turn over information, or as part of some sort of governmental investigation or request. Now, you need to be able to handle those requests and responses in a consistent and defensible manner, and failure to do so, as many of us have seen articles or headlines in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, can lead to some pretty disastrous consequences. So one of the goals of good information governance is keeping your company off the front page of the Wall Street Journal in a way that you would prefer not to be there. This is all part of risk management, and it's being able to find what it is you need to find, when you need to find it, and be able to provide it on a timely and defensible basis. It also has, as we'll talk about in a little bit, an element of knowing what's going on inside of your own organization and making sure that you are best situated to identify potential wrongful actions within your own organization, whether in the course of an investigation or a self-audit. So what does information governance mean? Well, very quickly, just touch upon a couple of points here. I've referenced data mapping here as one point, but it's really more than that. What is data mapping? It's really a fancy word for knowing what do you have, where is it, how is it kept, and who controls it within your organization. If you can't figure out what you have, you can't access it on a timely and consistent basis, then you set yourself up for potential unnecessary costs and risks. And that's why there's also a reference here to defensible policies within the organization for preserving, identifying, reviewing, and ultimately producing electronically stored information in response to a request or in the context of an internal investigation. Collaboration here is also key because, as we'll talk in a moment, it really takes a blend of different specialties, records management, legal, compliance, IT to do this effectively, as well as leveraging both people, process, and technology. Next slide, please. I talked about risk already. Let me drill down into that a little bit further. We talked about the bigger the data, the bigger the information governance challenge. Well, it's also true that the bigger the data set, the bigger the potential risks. And what is the risk? Again, the risk is not knowing what is going on within your own data set or not being able to accurately describe what you have, how it's kept, and be able to provide it in response to a request in a consistently defensible manner. And again, within reason and in a proportional fashion, but those are topics that are probably outside today's webinar. What are some of the drivers for this increased risk exposure? Well, the growing size of data is one of them. But within that same framework, we have increased regulatory compliance pressure, and you have more to actually be compliant with. There's an increase in litigation exposure if data is not understood or not handled properly. There's always the risk that you have inadvertent disclosures or breaches. That is, your data is getting outside of your organization, and because you're not able to track it and keep tabs on who knows what and who's talking to who, you open yourself up for risk of security breaches. That similarly, there are risks of intellectual property theft, which can be critical for many organizations. And of course, one that we'll be touching on later in the demonstration, and that is the potential for fraud within your own organization.
Yep. So what I wanted to cover on this slide is just give people some understanding of what the big data scenarios are. At Utopia, we essentially look at the big data scenarios according to reporting. So it's like running reports, but running them over really big sets of data in the billions of rows, right? And there's technology that helps you do that in a very quick manner and allows you to do drill downs and some investigation around the data sets. The other scenario is the search scenario. It's like finding, as we say here, it's like finding that needle in a haystack. It's like you've got all of this information and trying to actually identify some snippet of information, some snippet of relationships that's in that information that you didn't know about before. You have the big picture scenario. So this is like saying, okay, so I've got everything all in one place. Let me see if I can see some patterns in there that enable me to make sense of what I'm seeing. And you've got the track and predict scenario. So this is where you've actually got a lot of history and you're trying to work out, well, what's going to happen next? Can I see some trends in the information that allow me to do some prediction? So the demo that we're going to show you today as part of this webinar will actually cover the search, the reporting, and the big picture scenarios.
Let me touch upon that a little bit more, Peter, and go through some of the tools and processes that we're using in the legal field, working with clients to tackle big data and identify what it is that we need to know on a timely, consistent, and defensible basis. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really critical that one find the proper intersection of people, process, and technology. So by people, it's important that you have, as I mentioned earlier, the right folks involved with what is it that you're trying to accomplish. And let's take the example of an internal investigation where a company has reason to believe that there might be some untoward conduct going on within the organization, but really needs to satisfy itself. What is the scope of it? What's going on? Is there something to be concerned about without tripping any alarms? And either can do that internally or bring in an outsider. But how can they use technology to assist them to do that more effectively and more efficiently? Well, first you have to have the right people in the room. So you have to have the subject matter experts with respect to what is the it that you're trying to find out, what is the allegation that's been made of potential wrongdoing, so that you understand who the players might be, what the subject matter might be, and where you might find fingerprints of those potentially involved or allegedly involved in whatever it is that you're investigating. You also need to have the technologists involved, because if the subject matter experts don't have a good handle on where information resides within the organization, they're probably not going to find what they need to or not do it very effectively or efficiently. So IT needs to be at the table along with the subject matter experts, along with legal, and potentially if it's a financial matter, you may need to have the CFO involved, accounting, or even human resources, depending on what the nature of the matter is. This is what leads you to determine what is it that you're going to employ in order to try to locate the answers that you're seeking. Are you going to select sources of information manually, or are you going to employ the use of sophisticated technological tools in order to assist you, given what you're starting out with, to ultimately ensure yourself that you've done a thorough search and identified what's really important? In order to develop the parameters of what the appropriate scope of the search might be, again, in this context, an internal investigation, you need to do that not only in conjunction with the subject matter experts, but conduct some interviews. Get those people around the table, maybe talk to some folks that are involved in the department that might be suspected to be at the center of the activity in question, and help sort of frame out what it is that you want to accomplish, what are you looking for, where might it reside, who might be involved. You're not able at this point yet to confirm that, but at least you're going in with a trail of breadcrumbs that you know you want to follow to hopefully get to your destination. But here's the real key. More and more, it's not only important, but indispensable because of the huge exploding data sets that we've talked about to leverage technology in order to increase efficiencies. And we've got this giant funnel here on the right that is one that we often use when talking about electronic discovery. Because if a company is dealing with terabytes of information that they have to review, process, cull, and produce in the context of responding to litigation requests, you have to go through a process in order to get it down to a manageable set that eyeballs will actually be looking at. Because as we'll talk about later, it's expensive for a pair of eyeballs to have to look at documents, whether it's a law firm you've hired, whether it's independent investigators, or whether it's your own staff internally. You want to minimize the amount of materials you have to look at, so employing technology is really crucial to get down to that critical set. What kind of technology can you utilize? We're going to see some a little bit later today. Text analytics. Keyword searching is commonly used. You identify with the subject matter experts some ideas of what you're looking for. You come up with ideas on how to eliminate and separate some of the wheat from the chaff using deduplication, near duplication, denisting, which is basically removing known irrelevant email addresses and other topics like ESPN.com from your data set. You also want to employ filtering tools, contextual word searches, text analytics, fuzzy logic so that it accounts for misspellings and things of that nature. And generally using technology to assist you in identifying what is most likely to be relevant to your search or your investigation. The demonstration that we'll be seeing in a little bit will show you how some of these tools can work effectively as part of the process.
Yep, thanks. So when we have a look at that, one of the keys, as we said, is being able to get through large amounts of data. And there's going to be a number of areas where that is required. For instance, we find that in areas where there's mergers and acquisitions and people are looking for information being shared between the organizations, potential lawsuits, early case data assessment sort of arenas. And also things for government oversight, regulatory compliance. One of the areas we've seen this request for information, so to speak, is in the utilities industry, where people are presenting rate cases, where basically any user of the utilities services can actually request information that's regarding the rate case. And what we find is that having someone actually having to look at every single document and determine if it pertains to the particular request or not is very time-consuming, very expensive. So what happens is the use of technology, as Martin said, allows people to go out into their organization electronically, find information, find records, find emails, find things that pertain to that particular scenario, and bring it back and put it in a format where the subject matter experts can look at the information that's provided and say, yeah, that part's important, this part's not important, and then go back out and research the information to find additional information. What that allows you to do is get the most benefit from your subject matter experts' knowledge of the matter at hand. They're not wasting time reading 200,000 emails to see if they can find something in those emails. The technology allows that process to be streamlined. It allows you to share duties between the technologist, updating the tool and customizing the reports and that sort of thing. And the subject matter expert is then left with more time to do the actual analysis of what's going on, rather than having to go and do the arms and legs work of actually finding all these little snippets of information that are in the organization.
One thing to keep in mind here, and I just want to pick up on something, Peter, is that when we're talking about the data set or the corpus of data that an organization is going to deal with as part of its search and destroy mission, whether in the context of responding to a request or conducting an internal investigation, or something similar, is it's not just all about email and Word documents. Most of us think about records and information nowadays in the form of emails, Microsoft Outlook emails, if you're using that, web-based email if you're on that platform, and Word documents and Excel spreadsheets. That's the world most of us live in. There's a lot more out there, and the sources of electronically stored information that are incumbent upon us in handling this issue is increasing every day. So what I've tried to touch upon here is just some of the things on the list that we need to make sure we include in the net that is cast as part of this process, keeping in mind that this list is growing as technologies develop and become more prevalent every day. They generally fall down into two categories. There's the unstructured text sources, such as emails, text messages, instant messaging. Don't forget about social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, et cetera, of course. Aspects of this webinar are being tweeted as we speak. That's a data source that's being created that you can't forget about. More and more often, collaborative environments present a challenge for organizations. The use of SharePoint, internal wikis, internal blogs. These are sources of information that can't be forgotten about, particularly given the type of organization that you might have. You may have a sales force that communicates more outside of email through some other medium than you would imagine, or than another company. And of course, there's mobile phone records as well as the rising prominence of audio and visual records and files. Flip over to structured text sources, because this is also something that sometimes is overlooked. Most companies have some kind of a database, whether it's a payroll database, whether it's an accounting database, customer database, whatever it might be, that contains information, and that needs to be swept into this net and searched in some effective fashion to identify what it is that might support or aid you in answering the question that you have, whether it's responding to a request externally or it's your own internal investigation. So I just want to make sure that the scope here was something that was being properly understood, and unfortunately, we're talking about tools today that have the capability of doing this.
Yeah, I think one of the important things is that when you're doing these sorts of searches and when you're using the technology, you get the ability to actually increase the data source that you're looking at through using external data. And there are a number of organizations out there that provide information, like credit bureaus, financial reporting agencies, etc., where you can actually go and link the information that you've got inside your firewall, inside your organization, with information from outside the organization. And when you do that, it gives you that broader sense of what may be happening in the space that you're looking at. So it can actually identify relationships that you didn't know exist. It can help you identify people who are involved in the process that you weren't aware of. And it can obviously also help you identify related topics, other things that were going on at the same time that you may not have been aware of, that you can then link and see what the impact of those topics may have been on the particular area that you have an interest in. The tool actually allows that to happen almost seamlessly, and it then gives you that opportunity to build what you might call chains of linkages, where you can actually have a look and say, hey, these people knew about a particular topic, and what they knew about it and when they knew about it becomes part of the dimension that you can gather. The tool can help you organize and understand little groups, the little cliques that you have within an organization about who was talking to whom about these things, and maybe where they were talking to each other outside of the organization as well. So you use all of this data that's available to you to create a web of relationships, as we say. You get to see those official and those unofficial structures in your organization, and how the information is traveling throughout the organization. So what we're going to show today is essentially a demonstration of how you might go about looking for information about certain topics. In this particular case, we're going to use some of the publicly available data around the Enron case, which I'm sure everybody on this call is probably aware of. But essentially the flow that we use when we're doing that is that we actually look at what relationships you may be trying to find, some areas of interest, some special keywords, as Martin was talking about, those sorts of things. You actually go and do some initial analysis, and you come back and you present the results. You say, this is what we found. Here's some relationships, here's some context that we found in the organization. And then you actually sit with the analyst and actually look for something that's interesting and say, oh, that's very interesting. Can we dig down deeper into that particular point of interest and see what else we can find out about that? So you go back and you reprocess the information based on that additional request. And one of the things that the technology allows you to do is to redo this circle, this circle of investigation many, many times, very, very fast. Whereas if you're trying to do this manually, going out and going through, for instance, 200,000 emails to find some information and then having to go back out again here. So these are not the only tools that are available in the marketplace to do this particular sort of investigation, but they are some examples of best-in-class tools that are available. So now I'll hand it over to Jeff Barash, and he will take you through the demonstration that we've set up to show you how this can happen.
All right. Thank you, Peter. So what we have here on the screen is just a process of what I built to work through it. There are multiple parts to the automation of forensic analysis with structured data, org charts, employee information, vendor data, customer data, and all the information that relates to it. The technical challenge is in first acquiring the data from its multiple locations and getting it staged for further processing, as well as finding non-obvious relationships. But when it comes to the unstructured data, emails, faxes, filings, etc., there's a much bigger challenge in extracting the data to glean information from it. So this is the part of the process we're going to demo today. Remember, automating forensic analysis is not going to replace the need for auditors and subject matter experts. The purpose of automation is to act as a force multiplier, allowing one or more technical resources to work in concert with a few of the auditors to analyze the pages and pages of data and allow the correlation of the unstructured and structured data. So this is the broad description of the process. First, we need to convert, in this case, the email files, and it happens to be Outlook, to a technology-readable form. In this case, it's PDFs. We're going to take these input sources and pass it through our data quality text analytics friendly technology. And we're going to process it through text analytics. Now, the processing isn't going to be a blind search. We aren't expecting the technology to decide what it is and is not important. That's what the auditors do. In this case, the auditors have determined they wanted to search for some special purpose entities. We've added them to our dictionaries and added some patterns to allow for some accidental misspellings.
Jeff, this is Martin. Just to jump in here, for purpose of this demo, we thought we'd pick a familiar landscape. Just about everyone who hasn't been living on Mars for the last 20 years is aware of the Enron scandal. So you'll see some familiar terms here that we've used for purposes of this demonstration, and special purpose entities, of course, in the Enron matter, where that company's use of off-balance sheet arrangements and other accounting limitations to misrepresent earnings and modify their balance sheets by hiding certain assets and debts in ways that made earnings look better than they otherwise would have been. And when that was all revealed, ultimately Enron collapsed, and we all know what came from there. So you'll be seeing some familiar terms here. But for purpose of the demo, assume that someone within the organization back in 2001 had some inkling that something was amiss in terms of representing the finances of the company, and knew it had something to do with special purpose entities and off-balance sheet arrangements with certain names like Raptor and Jedi and Chewy. And so the auditors and the subject matter experts are working with the techies, as Jeff calls himself appropriately, to utilize this tool to try to find out what else is there, who's doing what.
Thanks, Martin. So with the guidance of the auditors, the techies, incorporate these key terms into the dictionary and add also patterns to allow for variances. This, in concert with the built-in parsing capabilities, allows the technology to extract not only the key email information from to subject, date, etc., but to search through the hundreds of thousands of documents for both exact matches to the dictionary and the patterns that match as well. So, for example, one of the SPEs was LJM. It could match with L period, J period, M period, L space, J space, M period, etc. So you have all those proper variants. Now, could this be done manually using search just like everybody does in their daily email life? Absolutely. However, think of all of the manual processes around this. The metadata around the email that has to be manually copied. All of the information flagged, extracted, and then made available for later research. In the case of automation, not only is this data and source available automatically, but all of the relationships amongst the emails, as well as the vast amount of structured data, is available to you. So just to show you an example, going through the process, we have an example here of key terms by email address. And you'll see that some email addresses actually have multiple emails. And this is how many times it was found in the data set. So with the unstructured data processed and the relationships to the structured data defined, now corporate relationship web, so to speak. And now it's time for the auditors to use their skills to do the drill down and discover areas for further research as well as remove any of the false trails. So now we're moving out of the straight technical and into the analyst part of it. All right. So, as we look at this, we can see here that there are many ways auditors can hunt through the data to find, in fact, what they're looking at. For any particular industry, they're searching for different things. For example, there might be communications across departments where there's unexpected or excessive traffic, including particular key terms. We're going to highlight what one auditor used on the process data to start hunting for what they thought were irregularities. Now, importantly, to anonymize the data, we could present the auditor with only a person ID here so that no biases can be slipped in as they do their analysis. But to make the demo easier, we're actually letting you see the email address. For this particular drill down, the auditor wanted to see the communications around the special purpose entities we discussed.
And the nice thing here, Jeff, is if this was presented to me and I had been engaged to either internally or externally come in and do this investigation, and we had a whistleblower who had raised certain concerns about how accounting procedures are being handled, overstating returns, and it was being done through special purpose entities, and we had some idea who might be involved in some of the names, but that's all we really know. So we plug in the names of the special purpose entities that we think, based on the allegations we have, anonymous of course, that might be something we're going to look at. And here under the key term quantity over on the far right side of the upper half of the screen, I see that there's a number of emails here that use all 8 of the terms that we plugged in of special purpose entities that are of interest to the ongoing investigation. So I might ask Jeff, well, there's some here that used all 8 terms. I want to see those first.
All right. So we've looked at them as per our auditor, and as we drill down, we see 2 individuals that have those 2 8 terms, Julie and Danny. As an auditor, we want to focus usually on one at a time. So in this case, we're going to look at the relationships for Julie. This, amongst all the other requests, are being sent to the technical team to be fed. In this case, we're going to go to visualization technology so we can more easily see the email chains. With that, we're going to look at the relationships. All right. Now, let's look at the email relationships when any keyword was found as part of the email that happened to involve Julie. Now, with Julie at the center, we see an entire set of emails containing the keywords, the direction, and the flow and quantity. And it's nice with the animation, so you can actually see how things are going over time. You can see a lot coming from Julie. In fact, there's a particular relationship that we can see a lot of emails going between Julie and this guy in the upper right-hand corner, Stephen. So we can actually drill down and take a look at it and see the subjects for it. And we can see it started mid-October and ended the end of November, right before Thanksgiving, in fact. And we can look at all of the different subject titles as it goes. Now, this is very helpful in identifying the timeline. Although we can see the totality of the emails, we really need to see a time frame when the emails were sent up and received. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually show what it looks like in a time frame. So it starts off where Julie is sending emails out. As we move towards the end of October, it's still just Julie talking to these other two people. Even through mid-November, it's still just the two of them. However, as it gets towards the end of the month, additional people have been added to the entire process. In this case, starting from Alma Carrillo.
And one of the things that you can see from this sort of analysis and visualization is that Alma was sending emails to everybody in this group except for the guy up the top, Stephen. So there may be a specific reason why he was communicating with everyone else in the group but not with Stephen, or maybe he was going through Julie to get information to Stephen. So using this sort of visualization technology allows you to see the relationships between the people, but also to track the timing of when information was actually presented and shared between the people.
That's absolutely right, Peter. And as the auditor or the investigator, being able to not only know what the chronology is, but then to be able to visualize it and particularly see the relationships here and the timing of those relationships can be really helpful. A lot of this will obviously depend in the real world, not just our illustration here as to who Stephen, Julie, and Danny are. But obviously going into your investigation, you would have the org chart for the organization. You would know what roles these people play within the company and whether there is anything unusual about the fact that Julie is sending things to Danny but blind copying Stephen. Well, why is that? Is there some reason to that, or is that just standard practice? Is Stephen outside of the group that Julie and Danny are in? Maybe they're in compliance and Julie is sending emails to Stephen, who's in some other role, who's in charge of off-balance sheet accounting, for example, and she's giving him a heads up that they're starting another compliance push and a review, and heads up, the auditors are coming, you might want to cover your tracks. And if you can time that up, for example, in my little hypothetical with when the company was doing this kind of a compliance push or audit push, and you see those unexpected relationships and timings taking place, that can be really valuable in leading an investigator to the root cause of potential malfeasance. So the other thing to keep in mind here is that all of this seems like a lot of effort and work, although it's really cool to see it in practice, and we all understand it would be very helpful. But let's face it, good information management, information governance is kind of like diet and exercise. We all know it's really good for us, and we'll be stronger, faster, and live longer if we do it, but very few of us do it as much as we should. But it's really important that we do treat it like our own personal health and consider it how do we best maintain the personal health of the organization. The normal pushbacks here, if we turn quickly to the next slide, when faced with the challenge to engage in better information governance is getting over the buy-in challenge. And the two things that you hear all the time are either we can't afford good information management because it's too time-consuming, we don't have the staff, it's too expensive, and it's high maintenance. But the reality is the flip side is true. You can't afford not to have good information management for many and even greater reasons. It's very time-consuming to go through this on a manual basis, as was mentioned earlier, and if you don't have the right tools to facilitate your investigation or responding to an external request. It can be enormously expensive to do it, much less if you do it wrong, you run the risk of having to do it again at an equivalent or greater cost, or if it's really mishandled, there's always the potential for sanctions or other potentially disastrous outcomes like overlooking a fraud within your organization that could cost you a lot more than adopting some tools in order to better manage your information internally. So that's pretty critical, and that's typically the pushback that you'll hear. Going back to the cost point in particular, if you want to make the business case for why good information management is important, one can look at a lot of different things, but this slide here about cutting to the chase, I think, is one of the most compelling ones. Keep this in mind. Companies today routinely spend in excess of $18,000 per gigabyte of information simply to process that information. That's just to put it into the sausage grinder so that you can then do something with it. And then you learn that a mere 10 to 20% of what comes out of that sausage grinder actually ends up as relevant. So you've just spent $1,800 per gigabyte on a bunch of junk that you're never even going to use. That's just pure waste. Let's go to the review phase. We were just talking about processing there. The review phase, the cost of reviewing, actually go back one second, the cost of reviewing electronic documents, that is, I talked earlier about eyeballs are expensive. This is once you've identified it, you've processed it, you've separated the wheat from the chaff, you've now put it in a form it can be reviewed, and someone is sitting down at a screen and looking at it, click next document, click next document. That cost, and again it depends on how you utilize this, mixes of technology and people, and whether you're outsourcing it or you're doing it inside, but the cost range is still between about $1.25 and $3 per document reviewed. And that's the whole all-in cost. So think about that cost on a per document basis. Multiply that in a data set where you're dealing with millions of pages of documents or hundreds of thousands, if not millions of documents alone, those costs add up pretty quickly. So how do you avoid having to incur these staggering costs? It's all about being smart and about leveraging technology in order to get to the chase and identify the most likely relevant information at the very get-go, so you can use that not only to potentially answer your question or the response that's put to you, but also to better educate you and inform you as to how to proceed with the rest of your investigation so that you're not spending these kinds of dollars looking at a bunch of garbage. Now we can go to the next slide. I've already touched upon a lot of this, so I won't repeat it again. But investing in good information management tools up front can avoid wasting money for some of the reasons I've described. It's also enormously time-consuming. So even if it's not just the external cost, think of the imposition upon your staff and your employees. They have to take time away from what they ought to be doing, making money for your company, mitigating your risk, things of that nature, and they're spending it on this project. That enormous waste of time also has a cost component. If these things are not handled properly and you're in a situation with either the government's on the other side or you're in litigation where you have an opponent, if you're not as well situated to deal with these issues as your opponent, you actually risk losing the upper hand in that dispute. Or you won't be as best positioned to effectively negotiate with the 800-pound gorilla, which is the governmental entity that comes knocking on your door asking for documents. Of course, if you have a good handle on your data and a good, defensible, consistent information management system and response protocol, you're much more likely to avoid any claims of spoliation. And what I mean by that is losing the data or inadvertently corrupting it or altering it. Think of the police officer that inadvertently walks through the crime scene and steps in all the bloody footprints. You've messed up the crime scene. That causes all kinds of problems in a dispute environment and can lead to things such as monetary sanctions, having to redo a production, or even an adverse inference that can ultimately spell your doom in the case itself. So we'll move to the next slide real quickly then as we get to the end here. The other question that I think needs to be asked of most companies is, forget about whether you're in a dispute or you're dealing with the government, you're conducting an internal investigation. Are there other benefits on a day-to-day basis from just a good business standpoint for why information management is important in an organization? Well, as I mentioned at the outset of this webinar, harnessing your information is knowledge. Knowledge is power. And yes, good information management can make you as a company more competitive if you're doing it better, faster, and stronger than your competition, because you have a better idea and you can learn from the information that you already have. And that's key. You've already made the investment in generating this information. It's already within your firewall. Why not utilize it to the best of your ability to make you more competitive, mitigate your risk, and mitigate your costs? So with that, let me just wrap up by saying that, again, understanding how data exists within your organization can be very effective and at least help you to avoid liability. And tools like the ones we've been talking about, automated forensic analysis, can really give you a leg up. And it's the kind of tools that in the legal field we see lawyers embracing more and more often in serving their clients. So with that, Terry, are we ready for questions?
We are indeed. The floor is now open for questions. You can enter any question that you have into the question panel of your GoToWebinar toolbar. We'll take as many as we can with the understanding that we want to get you guys back to your day jobs as quickly as possible as well. We did have a couple come in throughout the presentation. I'll start with those as people start to ask additional ones. The first addresses technology. If the technology finds everything you need, would you absolutely need fewer auditors in an investigation process?
Well, this is Martin. I'll just jump in and start, and then allow Peter and Jeff to chime in. Not to sound like a lawyer, but I think the short answer is potentially. First of all, there's no solution in the world that has found everything, human or robot. What you want to achieve is to have a demonstrable precision to your search such that you don't have to look at every last speck of data within the organization, because that's just not reasonable. That's not going to be expected. What you want to do is have a certain level of confidence that you have looked at the most likely relevant information that bears upon the topic, and whether that's 90%, 95%, or 97% confidence interval, that is achievable. But let's say that, I'll recast the question slightly, you've achieved that level of confidence that you've seen 97% of what there is to see that bears upon your topic. That alone does not completely obviate the need for auditors, but it should reduce the number of people that would be involved if it was done on a purely manual basis. As was mentioned earlier, you still need the subject matter experts to guide the process. Remember, it's a blend of people, process, and technology. But if you have the right tools and they're employed smartly within the process, then I think, yes, ultimately you're going to save money, and that's going to include fewer people having to do things as mundane as sift through things document by document.
Okay, next question.
And I think that's one of the important points. Sorry,
No,
I was going to say,
go ahead. Sorry,
I think
Peter.
that's one of the important points, that that it may not reduce the number of auditors that are involved, but what it will allow them to do is to focus more of their time on the analysis and answering the what if or why sort of questions, as opposed to just going out and doing the mundane searching for information. I think it gives the auditors the opportunity to work on higher value-added tasks by using the automation.
Okay, we've had one question asking about the software that was used in the demonstration. Jeff, could you go back to the slide that talks about the technology that was utilized in this particular scenario? And maybe either Peter or Jeff, could you give like an overview of what those applications are?
Surely.
Yeah, so I'll leave that one up to you, Jeff, yeah?
Thank you. The first technology that we used to process the data that did the text analytics as well as created the relationships that we used SAP's data services, and to extract and work with the textual information, it's the text analytics component of it. The second piece that we use with the dashboard to drill down, we're using the SAP Explorer with a HANA in-memory database as the back end, so we have high-speed access to the data. Finally, we fed the data in for the visualization into Palantir's technology. It's what we use to do all of the web relationship.
Thanks, Jeff. I think this is likely to be our last question because we're coming close to the top of the hour, and you may all want to weigh in on this. Isn't it harder and more expensive to have both technical and auditors working on a project instead of just auditors? Won't the setup and technology costs make it more expensive in the long run?
Again, this is Martin. I'll just jump in quickly and then turn it over to Peter and Jeff. I would argue the opposite. I would think that there might be a upfront cost, obviously, in the technology and in the training so that it's being used properly, but the long-term benefit is going to be a savings. And we've seen this over and over again in the legal industry when we're handling either big e-discovery projects, or we're dealing with internal investigations, or we're assisting clients navigate their own data sets within their organizations. We're finding that without the proper tools and the right blend of people, process, and technology, it ultimately is more difficult and more expensive to manualize those processes. Whereas while there might be an initial bump of the learning curve to make sure you have the right tool, selecting the right tool, and then making sure it's being used properly. Once you have that in place, there's a long-term savings. And keep in mind, there are plenty of organizations out there that don't just encounter this situation once a decade. There are plenty of organizations out there that unfortunately are dealing with these issues on a routine basis, and those are the ones that can really exploit the advantages of technology and process like this.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really critical points, that using technology like this means that it's reusable. If you're just doing it purely manual, every time you get a query, every time you want to search for something, you basically got to get your team together and they have to go and do that search once. Once you've got the technology set up and you've got it installed, then you can reuse it every time you get a query. So it actually acts as a force multiplier, essentially, to extend the reach of the auditors to be able to do multiple things, multiple searches, do it many times, and reuse what's been set up in the first place.
And not to monopolize the conversation, but you raised a very good point, Peter, and it's that consistent repetition of the process that is really important. Again, if you're dealing with a company that is either a serial litigant or has frequent interaction with the SEC or the FTC or some other governmental entity, being able to consistently defend your process is really important, because what you don't want to have happen is you went through one process in a dispute in Oklahoma and you turned around and did something completely different in a dispute in New Jersey. People are aware of that stuff. They find out about it, and then they start to exploit the differences in your processes to wonder why you're doing things differently, and that can create headaches, time and expense, and potentially adverse consequences. So having a consistent, repeatable, defensible process is very important.